Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today, let's go to Georgia. Georgia keeps on having lots and lots of political issues, and I want to go back, and I think we need a little background on this. So, fortunately, I have a very dear friend, Jill Carr Harris, who is herself of Georgian extraction, and she's got a family there, and she has long roots in Georgia, and has spent time there. So, I'm going to ask her for a little bit of background, and then she's going to introduce some folks in Georgia who are, well, they're not all in Georgia. One guy's in Washington, D.C., and he's Armenian, but he knows a lot about Georgia. Anyway, so hi, Jill, how are you?
I'm fine, Mita. Good to be with you.
All right, good. Let's get busy. Now, there's this country called Georgia. It's not the U.S., it's someplace in the Middle East, or I guess they call it the Caucasus, right?
Southern Caucasus, southern.
The Caucasus, and the whole Southern Caucasus is three countries. Is that right?
Correct. Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia.
Very good. Okie doke. And so now Georgia, I think, used to be part. Are all these countries? Were they formerly part of the Soviet Union?
They were all part of the 17 Soviet republics until 1991.
And then the Soviet Union fell apart, and they got their independence easily, or not so easily.
Not easily. There was some difficulty in Georgia with some invasion afterwards, but yeah, they got their independence.
And became democratic states, right?
Yes, they became democratic states.
Okay, now let's go to the first government, and we don't want to go through the whole litany, but there was a guy named Gonza Kurdia. Was he the first prime minister?
He was the first president of Georgia, and he was very Gandhian. He was saw himself as a nonviolent leader, and as you can appreciate, he had come out of a long experience with the Soviet Union, so he was aware of violence, and he was loved, and unfortunately died. I'm not remembering how he died, whether he was assassinated or whether he died naturally, but it was a very short-lived presidency. Yeah.
Okay, now then we had an invasion from Russia. What was that all about?
So Russia, I think, was resentful of Georgia because Georgia offered Russia intellectuals, offered a lot of raw materials, fruits, nuts, tea especially. And so the loss was felt. And so there was a number of skirmishes, which I won't go into, but the big war was in 2008. And that was the occupying of what is known as two provinces of Georgia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, two parts of the country not connected, which had a fairly large Russian population. And Russia came in and occupied that after a very short, I believe, 4-day war that it had.
Russia claimed to be taking good care of the people who really wanted to be Russian. Is that it?
Correct. Correct. We see that also in Ukraine today. Same.
Yeah. Okay. So now they still have control, right?
They still have those control, and they have their base, and their tanks are 30 kilometers outside of Tbilisi, the capital city. So they could attack anytime.
And is this Abkhazia or South Ossetia where the tanks are?
No, they're on a territory near Georgia. I don't know why, because Abkhazia is quite far away, but their tanks are located in a place that is very close to the periphery of the capital.
And it's officially part of Russia.
And so maybe they've claimed that territory as well. I'm not entirely sure, but there's always a fear in Georgia that these tanks can anytime overwhelm the country. Georgia is only 3 million people, so it's a very small country, and naturally feels insecure.
Yeah, my memory of dealing with Russians is that it's a place where lots of Russians love to go for a vacation or a special treat. It's a beautiful country, and they like the food and the wine. I've had Georgian wine.
Yes, and the
What
Black Sea, where Batumi is located on the western side of Georgia, is a very big tourist center for Russians.
they speak a special language, Georgian language.
Georgian language is a very ancient language, a non-Indo-European language.
Right. And that's Stalin was Georgian.
Stalin was Georgian, absolutely. Of course, he moved to Russia and moved to what is now Russia in the Soviet Union, and of course, he became the head of the leader of the country.
Mhm. Now let's fast forward a little bit, and there was a guy named Saakashvili.
There was. He was the one that was engaged in the war with the Russians, and they surrendered after 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
And he then tried to run for a third term, and people didn't want him, and so there was a certain amount of allegation of corruption against him, and he's been in prison almost ever since that time.
Oh,
Oh
really?
no, he had a short time in Ukraine when he was governor,
Mm-hmm.
but he's back in prison now, and I've understood this morning that his prison sentence has been extended another 5 years, 4.5 years. So they just keep him in prison.
Why? I mean, originally I thought he was a good guy. Didn't Soros support him?
So he was seen as aligned with the Americans,
Mm-hmm.
particularly people like John McCain was a very close associate
Mm-hmm.
at that time in his position in the Foreign Relations Committee, or whatever his particular designation in the U.S. was at the time. But they were very close, and Soros, not just Soros, the American State Department and the Institute of Peace, I think, provided huge resources in Georgia from maybe in the 90s onwards to do peace work and to build up the civil society.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's as a result of that aid that Georgia has a very robust civil society.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And now let's see. We have a transition to something called Georgian Dream, and I'm not clear about what all that happened. There was a party formed, a Georgian Dream, which
Right.
supposedly quite a democratic,
Yes.
European-oriented party.
Initially. Yeah, initially. So this was after Saakashvili and the debacle of an election which was seen as corrupt. I believe it was at that time that Bezina Ivanishvili came back as interim president for 1 year in order for democratic electoral elections to take place. And those elections took place. Georgian Dream came in with a majority. I believe it was 2012. And they were seen as quite pro-European. They, in fact, in the constitution that they developed, that they redrafted at that time, they said that they would be slowly working towards European integration. It was part of the constitution. And so it appeared from all outside viewpoints that it was a liberal democratic government.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but something went wrong, and it's not quite clear because now they're the bad guys, but they really are in power, right?
Something changed. It could have been because they went through 2 terms. So the first term was okay. Second term, they got a minority, I think, or not quite a majority. And then they were coming up in 2024 for their third election. And it seemed, according to many, that it was a fraudulent election, that there were people who were put on the rolls that actually lived outside the country. And it seemed like they could have won through malfeasance and not with a fair election process. And as a result, that created huge turmoil. So that is continued since October 2024.
Right. Now, we had some forums at that point, or at some points, two points I think we've had. And at one point, the president was a woman named Salome something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I remember seeing her on a television in the background when I was actually interviewing Irakli. And he had the TV on, and there was the president speaking named Salome, and she was refusing to give up the presidency or concede defeat in the election. Is that right? Can you remind me what was going on? Because there were people in the streets then, and what would that have been? It was still 2024, a few months.
Correct. The election was October 25th, 2024, and she felt that those elections were unfair as president. And so what was meant to happen was her presidency was coming to an end. And instead of electing the next president, the parliament had decided previously, 2 years previously, that the parliament would select the president. So even though she had been elected by the people of Georgia in 2018, when she came up to her end of her tenure, she saw two things. One, that there was an unfair, she felt that the election was fraudulent. And two, in this selection of president, they were, when she was not conceding defeat, they were going to pick another president and move her out of power earlier than she wanted. She wanted to stay in power as long as it took to have a free and fair election. But at the end of her term, close to the end of December, they asked her to get out, and they selected a new president to come into office. So she then joined the opposition parties and civil society in a protest against the government. And that's still going on today.
Okay, good. Now, that's what I was wondering. How long has this struggle been going on ever since we did that show back in
that's right.
December? Has been. And the struggle is against the Georgian Dream Party, which is no longer a democratic party, but rather it is in the pocket of Putin, if I'm understanding correctly.
In the pocket of the oligarch Bezina Ivanishvili, who is working closely with the Kremlin, absolutely in step with the Kremlin.
Okay, now so then there's a lot of actual repression going on in the last few days or in the last month or so. How long has it been going on that this has turned into what I'm hearing people call like a totalitarian regime?
I think it's been turning. So the Georgian Dream Party wanted to keep their power. And so they were unwilling to make a recall on the election. There was massive protests. And for the first 2-3 months, the protests were going and there wasn't so much resistance from the government. But slowly, there became more and more. And now the resistance and the pressure from the state to keep people off the streets, to shut down the opposition parties, to control the press, to control the judiciary has become almost absolute. And so people don't have any room to express their democratic dissent.
And this is definitely a downfall. In other words, there's not been a time since Georgia became independent after the breakup of the Soviet Union. There's never been a time when it was in such bad shape as far as democracy goes as now. Is that right?
That's what people are saying, and so that's why we did the panel, the forthcoming panel discussion, because we really wanted to hear from people themselves what the situation was, and it seems that it's become extremely oppressive.
Jill, I want you, if you we'll start. Please introduce our guests and tell everybody a little bit about who they are.
Hello, friends. We have a wonderful panel set of discussants today. I want to start with Irakli Kakabadze. Irakli is a longtime peace researcher, peace trainer, peace activist, founder of IMTD, Gandhi Foundation Georgia, and other organizations. He is deeply involved in peace work and creating peace zones. He completed his doctoral degree in conflict resolution from the Tbilisi State University. So I want to welcome Irakli for joining us this morning. Irakli, yeah. I secondarily want to introduce Dr. Vakhtang Maisaya, who is an incredible scholar in the field of security. He has affiliation as a very senior professor at Tbilisi State University, Caucasus University. I understand he has been teaching at the University in Poland, Warsaw University. He will be teaching a course this November on Caucasus and its geopolitical relations. As a national security expert, he has numerous studies, which I think we'll hear something about as we speak today. But I want to also mention that he was formerly a political prisoner under the Saakashvili regime in Georgia and suffered in jail for quite a number of months, and years, and will be able to present not only a scholarly presentation of what's the crisis in Georgia today, but also from a deep experience of its prison system. I also want to, last but certainly not least, our great friend Arsen Karatian. Arsen is Armenian. He is presently the CEO of Alec Media, which is trying to produce, a news that is transparent and from Armenia itself. He does have a Georgian outlet of Alik Media, but he himself has been blacklisted from Georgia because he speaks truth to power. And Arsen was very involved in a leadership position in the Velvet Revolution in 2018 in Armenia, which helped to overthrow the previous regime and bring in a democratically elected regime under the current Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. Arsen was a special assistant to the Prime Minister in his early days and now continues to do very significant work on the Armenian situation, both inside Armenia and outside. So I welcome you very much, Arsen, to this presentation. So I wanted just to get started. Let's open it up and start with Dr. Vakhtang Maisaya in terms of the current crisis that we see in Georgia today. I want to say that we did have on our Project Save the World broadcasts, I think 30 days into the protests of Georgia. So we're now, almost in the 200th day. So in the early days of the Georgian protest.
Since November 28th, last year.
Right. So we've had many days of protests, but in those early days, we did have a program, and it looked very positive that the protesters were bringing back a sense to the population in Georgia that the constitutional provision for the EU should be maintained and that we needed to maintain that important relationship. What has happened since then?
Georgia, we have just about such very interesting foreign policy orientations since Georgia declares its national statehood and its independence. Georgia declared its independence on April 9, 1991. And when just about Georgian National Liberation Movement leader Sviatlam Sakarya came to power, and the national then government, they declared, or they forced to declare, so-called neutrality foreign policy, just orientations with just concentration on the Caucasus regional security umbrella construction.
Am I correct to understand, Professor Masaya, that even though the protest started in November, on November 28th, 2024, and they were responding to the U-turn which the Georgian government was making to the EU and NATO, going against the Article 78, and how important, how significant that U-turn or turning away is. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that right back to the early days of Georgia's formation in 1991, that Georgia was practicing not only a neutrality, but a regionalism focusing on the Caucasus. And this was the vision of its nationhood, which got encompassed in the Constitution itself. And that the current government is going against that very sense of its nationhood. And finally, Professor Masaya, am I hearing that this currently pro-Russian government is weakened Georgia's sovereignty because not only is it going against the Constitution, but all the other parties have left, practically left, and it's a single party rule, so that it's not in itself a strong sovereign republic based on a constitution. It is rather veering away from that, which is leading to a constitutional crisis. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the protest that is going on now.
People the mass people just protested and just came out to the street, and they also declared that constitution privilege should be just about preserved and sustained. Those are the main provisions. Then Georgian, I call the pro-Russian government, they also declared officially to just disbark and even just to also disband it with absolutely non-human, absolutely terrible methods. Which was absolutely, we can see in Belarus, in Russian Federation, one by one. I also mentioned about 200 Wagner mercenaries been also just arrived in Georgia, and they also just coordinated about Georgian special services, just about units of disbanded these military protest rallies, and of course to seize power. And officially, Georgian pro-Russian government also declared about to more fomented and developed pro-Eurasian foreign policy. They also changed and shifted foreign policy orientation, that they violated the constitutional privilege of Article 6, 10, and Article 78. No, they also just even rigged and fabricated the Georgian parliamentary election, which was taking place on October 26th of last year. This was also the point. So they just seized, and there's a usurpation of the power, and
Right.
by doing so, like it was happening in Belarus. I call it like a Belarusization. And they also just about fence down and promote so-called Belarusization trend in Georgia.
Irakli, do you want to sort of explain how did we move from this, what seemed to be a bit of a a positive protest and things were moving, and suddenly things got very, very difficult. Is there some causes that you can identify?
These actions were provoked, as Vakhtang said, absolutely rightfully so, that on November 28th was the last moment when the youth decided to just come out on the streets. And this was basically primarily organized from the grassroots population, not by the parties, actually, whose leaders are also arrested right now. 8 political leaders are arrested, together with more than 55 activists, who some of them are actors, some of them are writers. So this was a widespread protest. And this was against the Russification of Georgia. They say the Russian capital is always a political and imperial capital that asks the guys who are those so-called oligarchs who are controlled by Kremlin, all of them are controlled by Kremlin, that the money is given to them to use it to subject any country where they are. And we have different examples in different countries, but unfortunately, Georgia right now is the most unfortunate example of that, our country was going towards Russification. Last 2-3 years, he openly leaned towards Russia, Russification of Georgia, and Russian imperial interests became very obvious here. And there, right now, the pace is very, very fast. They're going faster and faster. So when the people came out,
was this Iraqi because they wanted to keep the Dream Party in power? That they started tilting in 2017 in this direction, because before that we didn't see the tilt and the Russianization as strong, did we? And the second part of the question I wanted to ask you is, if the U.S. ambassador, who's recently resigned, Ellen, whatever her name
Karen
is,
Dunnigan,
Robin Dunnigan.
Robin Daniger.
She resigned on the basis that, basically anti-American state is not appreciating or even speaking properly to her embassy.
Obvious is that the Georgian Dream is a Russian party, basically, and that their rule is completely connected to Kremlin and Mr. Putin. And unfortunately, you're right that this was not very visible before, I would say, 2019. The first time was a so-called Gavrilov night massacre, when they committed the massacre. Basically, they cracked down on a peaceful demonstration that protested the arrival of the Russian parliamentarian Gavrilov, and sitting him in place of Kamsakhurdia, Sviat Kamsakhurdia, first president of Georgia. That was in 2019. And after that, slowly but surely, Georgian Dream started to show the signs that it was really a Russian dream. It was not the Georgian Dream. And that's how people call it right now. And everyone calls the party that is included the Russian party, not a Georgian party. And this is basically very much apparent right now. Keeping of power of the Georgian Dream is keeping the power of Kremlin in Tbilisi. Unfortunately, we have the situation right now, which I have personally never witnessed. I am right now 56 years old, and I remember Soviet Union pretty well, and we were demonstrating during the Soviet times, and I was there present when the National Liberation Movement gained the strength. And even in the end of 1970s and the beginning of 1980s, we never had this kind of repressive, authoritarian, close to totalitarian regime. And that's manifesting itself in every kind of aspect of the human life. People are suppressed in every way, starting from the political repressions, arrests, torture, and beating up, and then thugs beating up people in front of their houses, declaring many people persona non grata, also basically not letting the free assembly to happen in many cases, but at the same time, neoliberal economic biopolitical pressure, which is basically suspending their salaries, applying big fines to people just for being in the street. I mean, standing on Rustaveli Avenue today might cost your family 5,000 lari a night,
Yes.
which is a huge money in Georgia. So this is a very repressive regime these days. It became from a very masked kind of pseudo-democratic regime, became a very openly authoritarian, close to totalitarian regime where nobody is safe. Practically nobody has a safe line to live because people who protest Putin type of authoritarian policies, and I agree with Vakhtang, and Arsen and I have talked about this a lot too. A lot of people call Belarusianization of Georgia. And I hope this is a vacation, as some people say, but right now we don't see the signs of vacation. We see the long process, which somehow needs to stop we hope, with the peaceful ways. And the young people were, as you are saying, it was seen as it was a celebration, but it was a peaceful protest, and they were very creative. They've done wonderful things, including dancing and opera singing and rock and roll and poetry. Even it goes on right now. People are still protesting every day. Last night I was there on Rustaveli Avenue. There were lots of wonderful people there, young people, and talking about intellectual subjects, reading poems, etc., etc. But government is cracking down on that very hard and demanding the Georgian population join Russian Kremlin oppressive regime. So right now we don't have a celebration. Lots of people are very disappointed. Many young people have left. I was in the United States in February and March, and we have more than 200,000 people who left Georgia in the last 2 years.
When we are talking about how Russians use their sharp power, I would mention that in Georgia, Russians' political presence is reflected in the three main layers. First layer, upper link to the absolutely pro-Kremlin political party, which was just about organized and even just originated quite lately. It calls about solidarity and peace, which is led by Russian citizens and Georgian just about diaspora leader Middle East. Second layer of pro-Russian, we have in Georgia like a people's power. People's power being originated inside of the ruling party. They are absolutely fully reflected that they belongs to the Russian foreign policy just about supporters. So we can name this like just about Russian, pro-Russian. First Russian party, second the pro-Russian parties. And third layer, it's inside of the ruling party, like a Georgian Dream, we have like a sympathizers to the Kremlin just about authorities. So we have like a three layers of the Russian policy providers on the Georgian political fora. All three political parties, they have its own mass media just about networks. They control televisions, control just about radio broadcasting stations. They have also very strong just about social media just supporters and special networks. So, and they also received money from the Kremlin.
Thank you.
So
Thank you very much. You see the architecture of the Kremlin that has been slowly built and strengthened over the last few years. Yeah. Arsen, since you're one of the persona non grata to Georgia, can you sort of say from your viewpoint as an Armenian and have worked so closely with Georgia and really tried to build solidarity for a South Caucasian peace, how are you and your colleagues seeing what's going on?
This whole thing also began with very specific moves by the Georgian Dream Party, one of which was the so-called foreign agent law, which was adopted last year, which directly affected civil society institutions. According to that law, any organization that receives over 20% of its budget from overseas should go and register as a foreign agent, which allows the state to basically do whatever they want to do with the organization. And our media has made, like many other civil society institutions in Georgia, are under quite a close watch. The opposition parties, three of them have refused to take their mandates and go to the parliament. One of the opposition parties still is sort of in between. But right now, what we call, in case of Georgia, we call it uni-party parliament. So there's only one party that makes decisions, obviously. And we Armenians are very much concerned about what we're seeing in Georgia, because for years, Georgia has been the pioneer and the leader of the pro-Western integration, European integration, NATO integration. Right now, we are very much concerned about this processes, because in case of Armenia, democracy is probably the only thing that is left for us to sort of survive in this very difficult environment. And if the closest neighbor, one of the key partners for Armenia, is having this kind of backlash, this will ultimately affect us all. So, with regards to possible direct effects coming from Russia, we are also concerned because we have elections coming up in 2026. We have already seen the mingling of Kremlin into internal affairs of Georgia during the elections. We have seen the same thing in Moldova. And so we are seeing a very new Russia coming in with different tools. So this coming year is going to be quite rough. And we are quite concerned about how far is Russia ready to go, especially considering the fact that they have already made some serious appointments in Kremlin. We saw Mr. Kirienko being appointed as the deputy chief of staff of Putin, who will be directly involved in dealing with Caucasus affairs, especially when it comes to media and other issues. So there is no lack of continued Russian involvement in the internal affairs of our countries. Georgia is already in quite a rough position, and we are very hopeful that Armenia will be able to survive this one. But everything is on the table, and there is a lot of need for further and more Western engagement in our countries. We have the European Union and different players of the EU continuing to be strongly involved. We see some less interest in the Trump White House, which is concerning for us. So that is basically leaving us alone with a strong player like Russia. So our hopes, and currently I'm in Washington, D.C., meeting different people, trying to see not only about Armenia, but also about Georgia, of what we can do at this time of overall, I want to say, degradation of the liberal democratic agenda in general in the world, and with a conservative administration, which we're witnessing now in the United States.
I'd be interested, Professor Messiah, to understand from you how you see the efforts of former President Salome trying to bring the European Union and the U.S. More sympathetic to the pro-EU grouping, and is there any hope in her platform that she's created?
If we had like such charisma leaders, like just maybe as we had in case of the Gamsakurdi or Shevardnadze, that it would be more easier to just promote this trend, and also just to have more fierce resistance and struggle against Russian forces in Georgia. So we need equal just about power and equal just about force to equalize and stabilize. They're just about impudence activities in Georgia. This is what I wanted to mention. But unfortunately, well, Salome is still just one of the key, more reliable and liable just about politicians, because all other just about eight opposition leaders are under the arrest. They've been detained and arrested.
So, Arsen, how do you see any leadership in Georgia if Salome and you, Irakli, how do you see leadership? Because we want, if you want to build Western solidarity, we need to know where to focus it, right? Otherwise, it's extremely difficult to deal with a very disparate situation, even though that may be the reality.
Political leaders are born with their innate charisma. Regarding Madame Zurabishvili, who was a wonderful president in especially last 2 or 3 years of her presidency, she's a very good diplomat. She's very good on international stage. She's also very good in the meetings with the opposition leaders, with the civil society leaders, etc., etc. But as Vakhtang has mentioned, and I do agree with him, unfortunately, right now, there is a need. I was there last night at the protest there, and the young people are there, and they're demonstrating there. But you definitely need to have, in terms of Gandhian understanding of peaceful non-resistance and non-violent resistance, you definitely need to have some sort of charismatic leaders. In some ways, I would not mean necessarily in a Weberian sense, strictly Weberian sense, as a charismatic leader as such, who would inspire sometimes historical devotion, but charismatic leader in a good sense, like Václav Havel or Zviad Gamsakhourdia, or in Armenian case, Nikol Pashinyan, who is incredible, who is right now, Armenia is a bulwark of democracy in the South Caucasus. And thanks God we have Armenia in the South Caucasus, which is leading us by example right now. So we do have a problem with the leadership, because unfortunately, right now, at this very moment, 8 leaders of political parties are arrested, but also people do not have much trust in political establishment as such, not just at the ruling party. Ruling party is considered the Russian puppet by almost everyone. But then, of course, looking for the alternative. And right now, looking at the alternative considers basically people, and I've talked to some of the leaders of the youth movements yesterday, and they're saying we need the political force, which means assembling 200,000 or 300,000 people on the street. And in this case, this was happening last year in the spring. Arsen very well mentioned the adoption of the Russian law, what they call the Russian law, the law on foreign agents. Lots of people came out on the street, about 200,000 or 300,000. And unfortunately, this was basically the leaders decided not to push, and they waited for elections. And then, as Vakhtang has mentioned, the elections were rigged. We predicted, we actually made a film. Vakhtang Komachidze, our friend, who is a good film director, made a film, investigative film in August of 2024, how Georgian government was rigging the elections using the IDs of the people who left Georgia, and there are about 1.5 million Georgian citizens outside Georgia, including United States, Canada, Western Europe. Some of them are in Armenia also, etc., many countries of the world. So all these people, they have their IDs, they're double IDs, so they can use their IDs, people who left Georgia for different reasons, and some of them are not official citizens of the other countries. They used those to rig the elections, and Vakhtang was absolutely right. The elections were brutally rigged. And then unfortunately, people did not trust the opposition political parties enough to come out on October 26th, because they thought that they were trying to make deals. But then after November 28th, people just came out because it became obvious the Georgian government came out against EU, and they just said, we don't want basically to continue negotiations on becoming the candidate, becoming the member state of EU, and we're stopping this process for 4 years, which was absolute big blow. And then again, hundreds of thousands came out. But unfortunately, the leadership problem persisted and still persists. And we do need, of course, that there's a very, very good way of Gandhian organizing, a satyagraha, which Arsen and I both know from our experiences from different revolutions that we had in our countries.
Alen Koshtana, who went on hunger strike, was an example of a leader. But we tend to think of leaders as big men somehow elsewhere. Why aren't we supporting leaders to come up in these, movements? How do you see any light at the end of the tunnel with smaller leaders coming up through this movement?
Will agree with a lack of a specific strong leader. Unfortunately, as much as we have so-called parliamentary ruling systems in our country, the original intention of this change, and Armenia followed Georgia in adopting a new constitution with going from a strong presidential to a parliamentary state, but the original intention was ill-conceived. These changes did not happen because the societies matured to become a parliamentary state. They happened because the existing regimes wanted to prolong their lives, because the constitutions did not allow for a third term. They hoped that they would sort of keep becoming prime ministers after being presidents to stay in power. And that's what happened in case of Georgia with the change of constitution by Saakashvili, which he lost the election. And same thing happened in Armenia when they changed the constitution going into parliamentary. And then we had a revolution as well. Now, the problem is the level of sophistication of the political debate also. We are unfortunately in a very primitive level to this day. In some cases, we do have intellectual people or strong leaders, have had many charismatic leaders in the past. The lack of a strong political leadership or a charismatic leader obviously is one of the key problems, and I will agree in this with my colleagues. But at the same time, strong leadership and charismatic leaders often become despots. And we have seen this when there is power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So as much as my great friend Irakli sees Armenia as a great hope, we are seeing some negative trends in case of Armenia as well. Now, this is not a panel to discuss Armenia's internal processes. And I think that the problems are not just because these people are originally despotic. Oftentimes, the systems and the societies that we live in are not able to produce new thinking, new approaches, because power sharing is the fundament of democracy. And when we don't have that institutionalized, then people having too much power, they don't want to give it up. And so we have a big problem that we need to discuss and or try to find solutions with regards to how can we actually go into a level of power sharing where people, not only political parties or politicians, but also larger civil society, other actors that are involved. Georgia has an incredible civil society that is stronger than the political parties right now. And that's one of the bigger issues that we need to recognize. One of the other issues is that the Georgian society has matured enough to a degree where they're able and they know what they want to build as a country. But then you have a group that has taken over power and is able to maintain a regime that has nothing to do with the dreams and aspirations of our peoples. So we probably have to go back as much as, of course, Jill, you were asking Professor Maisaya to sort of leave, let alone the political, the historic context. We need to go back to the historic context as much as we don't want to do that, maybe trying to understand the current affairs, because in the end of the day, some things that were idealistic and dreams that we had in the 90s have turned into something that we've never imagined. We have a situation which is maybe worse than what we had in the late 80s under the Soviets. And so this is something that we need to, and we ultimately we're going to go back to education, something that is a long-term, long run, but this is something that we need to tirelessly work on. Educate bring more and more mechanisms of nonviolence and understanding of how we can move forward with already existing mechanisms, but suggest our own ways of how we deal with our internal affairs without going into violent conflicts, because healthy conflicts are not bad. We can talk, we can discuss, we can debate, we can argue. We do that all the time. But it goes beyond. Just yesterday, and I'll finish it here, we had, again, physical fist fight at the Armenian parliament. Yes, yeah, we have the democratically elected parliament. Nobody's doubting that, including the political opposition. But in the end of the day, because the debate goes beyond very quickly of any kind of normalcy, people go out and start beating each other. Same is true in case of Georgia. So in a way, we have degraded from the societal harmony level that we had in the early 90s or late 80s, except even if we had violence, war, civil wars going on, we were able to debate in a more civilized manner back in the day than now. And very quickly, it becomes physical, and debates and discussions are basically out, because once you start hitting each other, what are you going to talk about, right? So my great hope is there is a generation that is coming which may be changing us in a different way. I'm not as much of a Soviet product, although I do remember Soviet Union as well. After a while, I started going back to learning what was going on back then. What was the political debate? What the topics of these debates were, and they are much more sophisticated than what we're hearing now. We have a very primitive discourse, and the discourse is you're either pro-Western or you're pro-Russian, and then politicians and groups position themselves within this context, and it's a non-starter, because in the end of the day, if you bring in geopolitics, you actually allow bigger players to come in with easier options, and that's how Russia is manipulating inside our societies. And that's something that I believe we should try to avoid and keep it internally, keep it first of all locally in our own countries, but why not make it more of a internal regional? And I think Armenia, Georgia in this respect have a great opportunity to discuss a lot of opportunities of cooperation, including in the areas of democracy and else, which has a very good history.
Thank you. I want to just turn to Professor Messiah for his final thoughts on how do you see any possible solution in the sense of getting out of these binaries of us and them. Is there any way, Professor Messiah, to reach into the what is now the Russian Dream, Georgian Dream Party, and find allies, find people who are disgruntled, try to build a stronger front that can move us forward? Or do we just continue with our very, very bifurcated struggle?
Most important, Victor, education. This is the first case. Second case, of course, about to mobilize all people and also just try to fight against the information and propaganda war. Try to persuade to our Georgian public societies to not to change their opinion and not to shift their opinion from the pro-Western to the pro-Eurasian stance. And we also managed to do it. And I guess third one, we don't need about much more charisma leaders. Because just help Georgia to be on the liberal democracy states and to pro-Western just about values adherence level.
Thank you. That was really a brilliant final presentation. Thank you. Irakli, you have the final word. How do you help us with all of your experience as being one of the most, as Arsen said, one of the most foremost political and peace activists in Georgia today? How would you see a small step forward in the present situation.
I agree with my friends Arsen and Vakhtang on the point that education plays a very pivotal role, and it's very, very civic education, providing civic education to the entire population is very important. First of all, in Georgia, and of course in Azerbaijan, and as Arsen says, it's needed everywhere. But at the same time, I would say that we need to focus this educational effort on different things. And as our great friends from India tell us, also very interesting, is to focus on nonviolent economy, nonviolent politics, nonviolent relationships. I would agree with Arsen that we definitely need to learn nonviolent relationships, relearn it. And as he noted that in 80s, we had more nonviolence because all these leaders were Gandhians, Sigam Sahuria, Kostava, Terpetrosian, and others. They were educated people, and they knew that we shouldn't do things by violent means. Now, the Gandhian education, and not just Gandhian, of course, the nonviolent education is needed very much to focus on not just the protest, nonviolent protest, but also on nonviolent interrelationship between economies, between peoples, and everything. And another good point that Arsen has brought was the first meeting, actually, that originated the whole idea of the United Caucasus, which is very much relevant today. United Caucasus, 3 South Caucasian countries, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, forming some sort of a union. It was actually originated in 1988 in Yerevan at the environmental conference, where Georgian Greens were also there. Zurab Zvania headed that delegation, together with Armenian and Georgian colleagues, together put together a proposal for environmental protection, but not just environmental protection, but the sustainable development of all 3 South Caucasian countries. And I do remember very well when you came here with the Jai Jagat, and Jai Jagat advocated for sustainable development goals. And it was a brilliant mission in Armenia. And unfortunately, due to COVID, it started right at the border of Armenia and Georgia. But I think that was a great beginning, because this whole goals, the sustainable development goals, how to collaborate, co-work together, how to create United Caucasus together, which has a great tradition of peaceful coexistence from Neolithic times. And in these thousands of years, we have a long tradition of peaceful coexistence. And in fact, Arsen mentions this very frequently, and I do completely agree with him that there was only one 3-day military conflict between Armenians and Georgians and that was due to accident during the First Republics.
In 2000 years.
Yes, in 2000, maybe more than 2000. I would actually doubt that it was 2000. It was more than 2000. We do have a large history of the nonviolent, and we need to elicit, using the words of Jean-Paul Lederach, elicit from that history, from our coexistence. And even when we go to Yerevan right now, we have a wonderful time, incredible experiences, and in Tbilisi also, etc. These are ongoing relationships also to elicit those peaceful, not just personal, but also economic, cultural relationships, everything which we do have. Sayat Nova, a great poet who wrote poems in Armenian, Georgian, Azerbaijani Turkish, and Persian.
Really talking about an indigenous vision of peace and security, which has to be part of the education
Yes, local and global. We need to learn from Gandhian experience, of course. This is the greatest experience of the 20th century of nonviolent resistance, but also filled with human love and compassion, of Václav Havel and Nelson Mandela. And we have great examples around the world, and we don't need to alienate Martin Luther King Jr.
So not just Caucasian, but also open to the world.
Of course. No, South Caucasus is just one of the points. We have connection to Minoan civilization. We have connection to Neolithic Anatolian cultures. Of course we do. Armenians and Georgians and Albanians, others had the stake there thousands of years ago. But at the same time, it's very important, and I would like to emphasize this. I think the movements like Jai Jagat and other movements, international movements, We need to coordinate with international movements, especially now in this crisis moment in Georgia and in other places everywhere, to have international union for peaceful social change.
That is a wonderful ending, very high level ending. And I want to thank all of you. You're just all amazing people. And you're in an amazing struggle. And in the short term, looking grim, but we have a long term vision. So thank you very, very much for this. And
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
thank you to Meta for making all of
Thanks
this
to
possible.
Meta.
Thank you.
Bye. See you again.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
bye for
See you
now.
again. It's my great pleasure.